Welcome to the Paperless Productivity Podcast, where we have experts give you the insights, know-how, and resources to help you transform your workplace from paper to digital, while making your work life better at the same time.
Hi, my name is Scott Bade. I'm the CEO and visionary of ImageSoft. We're happy today to be hosting this episode on digital evidence management. At ImageSoft, we specialize in providing technology solutions in justice. So we do a lot of work with courts and prosecutors. And one of the hottest topics of late has been digital evidence management, especially within the justice system. Essentially, digital evidence management, or DEM, is a platform that takes various forms of evidence, stores it securely in a cloud-based data repository. It takes in things like documents, scanned images, audio, some obvious things, but it also can be used to manage more complex things, such as cell phone data exports, multi-stream video outputs, etc. I'm joined by Terry Chaudhuri. Terry's an engineer in our firm. Today we're going to talk about digital evidence management. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges, how you implement, some of the pricing side of it, and some of the factors that you need to be considering if you're thinking about this sort of technology. So hi, Terry. Thanks for joining me.
Hello, thanks for having me. I love talking about digital evidence. It affects so many organizations and it has been such a hot topic and does continue to garner a lot of interest today. So
thanks. Yeah, and so I think everybody's aware of how the proliferation of technology in society in general is being used today to create evidence in ways that really were never contemplated, even as short as 5 to 10 years ago. We're seeing unique digital formats make their way into the courts as evidence. There's been a lot of things in the media, on television, different stories about digital evidence and how they start either as cell phone files or different types of formats. Can you speak a little bit to kind of the growth of digital evidence and what you've seen? Because I know you've spent a lot of time working with ImageSoft customers. You spend a lot of time with prosecutors and courts. Can you maybe just kind of talk a little bit about the scale and growth of digital evidence in courts?
sure. Well, we've seen, digital evidence just grow substantially over the last probably 5 years or so. And the main reason is sheer volume. And basically that's because of the ease of creating that content, right? So we have police agencies now across the country are making dash or body cams mandatory. And now think of civilians and how all of us are carrying a smartphone and we can literally record and take pictures at any moment. So that is kind of, the content is just much more available now. And then the other growth area really is like kind of we're alluding to the new technologies. There's all these forensic tools to extract data from phones and computers, and we have drone footage, that's being used in cases, and even the smart homes where we have a Google and Alexa, and these are, essentially recording devices. And those weren't even thought about probably 5 or 10 years ago. And all of these are new things added that have to be brought into the case and viewed and properly shared and made part of a case.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned, it's kind of like the old world meets the new world because, the justice system has very specific rules around managing evidence and, managing chain of custody and things like that. And now suddenly you've got these new, it's kind of the Wild West of formats and outputs that are coming into the courts. So I think it's a very challenging and exciting time. It's exciting for folks that are trying to implement technology. It's probably a bit frightening for many folks in the justice world. And I know you talk to a lot of different customers. What would you say, and we've alluded to maybe a little bit of it, what would you say are the top challenges that they're experiencing related to this new world?
Yeah, and the main challenge really is the size, the quantity, and the formats. In the traditional case management and document management systems that are out there were never designed to handle this volume or these types of content, so they don't have anywhere to put them. So that's why products like Vault are now needed more than ever to manage this evidence, to be able to play back videos that have been recorded on many different devices from anywhere in the world, really, and protecting those files as well. So we know when they're being viewed, when they're being accessed, we can prove that a file has not been altered. And a lot of those things are all going to be so important now as digital evidence becomes some of the primary evidence used in cases going forward.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and you mentioned the name of our product, just so I'll bring that up. Our product is called Vault. It is a digital evidence management product. So let me segue a little bit. At this point in the world, I think to not mention the pandemic, we'd be leaving something. I don't want to focus on the pandemic, but obviously it's had an impact on the courts. It has maybe accelerated some of the capturing and the need for remote and hybrid access to this data. Obviously, employees are now more and more working remote. Folks are relying on the internet more and more. What are your thoughts, if you have any, related, the pandemic and its relationship to digital evidence management?
COVID really, exposed some technology holes that organizations, weren't filling back before that. And as working from home and remote became a reality for so many people, they were scrambling to try to figure ways to deal with that. Many of the courts, for example, who really didn't have the technology in place, simply closed down or postponed cases until they could get back online and start bringing in, the people into the courtrooms and stuff. But other ones that had some of the technologies, scrambled, maybe brought some video conferencing, electronic signatures, and other things, but there was still that ability to play content for people through those video conferencing tools. So digital evidence was another thing that people had struggled with for a while. So that was it really made it a reality for a lot of organizations, and some decided to continue to do remote hearings into the future for certain case types and things because it was easier and more convenient for some folks. And other ones have, reverted back to just in-person hearings when COVID kind of settled down for their particular areas. But at any moment, there's a lot of other factors that can come into play. That technology is still going to be needed. So having a good solid foundation is going to be key here so that you're prepared for the next type of event that might happen, whether it's COVID-like or completely different. Could be just a natural disaster or something in your area as well, that this technology is going to be more important than ever.
You mentioned a few kind of the stakeholders in the justice realm. Obviously, clerks, attorneys, defense attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, judges are all kind of key stakeholders for us. Can you talk a little bit maybe about some of the benefits of having an online digital evidence management solution to maybe those specific roles?
Yeah, many organizations really have to designate a specific individual or set of individuals just to handle like video files that are being brought into their office. And that's often delivered on thumb drive or DVDs, and then that staff member has to copy them, test them so they can play back them properly, tag them, index them to the case, and file them all. And there's a lot of steps there. If you have a solution like Vault that takes care of all of that, the person can upload it and they're tagging it and doing all that, and it's ready to go and available for use immediately. So all of that intake and those steps can essentially be eliminated. And then if you think about downstream, like a prosecutor, maybe they've got a case, it's a large case, high profile, maybe there's 50 different videos. If they have to open 50 different players and try to play back all of that content, it's going to take a tremendous amount of time to get through all of that. So again, having a single platform that's easy to use that can play all of those files, regardless of format, in one interface is going to be a huge advantage to them to getting the case evaluated and the evidence, and if we're going to even bring charges against that individual. So there's a lot of things to go through, and having a system in play that can make that easier to get through that content is going to be huge. So the intake is big, as well as the downstream users. And then in the court space, we see the court playing it, but now I have to play it in the courtroom, and then I have to play it in the jury room, and then I have to play it, give it to an attorney. All these different players that are part of the overall equation still need access to things. So having, again, one system that can easily share out to all of them, that makes a tremendous amount of savings for court staff as well when they're trying to get this content into the right hands.
It's a great point, and I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit. So you started to talk about different players and different formats. Can you maybe go a little bit deeper there? I mean, how does Vault overcome that problem? And what specifically does it do to video? I know we can't, for example, evidence is very sensitive. You can't alter it when you're moving it from one place to another. It needs to be very tightly controlled with a really clear chain of custody. So can you talk a little bit about how in the digital world you kind of provide that level of assuredness that the evidence hasn't been changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, there's different software out there that can record and make a video file. And all of those companies who are manufacturers of the cameras and the software could essentially use their own file formats. So when you get all of these different formats, there's a codec that's used to actually, understand the video and be able to play it. And there's so many of those out there. So we have tools that allow us to bring in virtually any file format from any proprietary manufacturer and play it in a single interface. And that also allows us to take advantage of some conversion tools where we can convert that into a standard format like an MP4 that we could then share to somebody else who would not need any special tools or players and can play it on any system that would be available to them, like a Windows Media Player or something like that. So those tools are available with the Vault product to be able to do that, and that makes it much easier now to handle all the different types of content that's coming into the system. And then when you talk about the audit trail, and it's true, we don't really allow any file to be edited or altered. So even if it's converted, we keep the original file, we keep the converted version, which still contains all of the frames and all the information. It's not been altered. Um, for those who don't know a lot about video, an MP4 is really a wrapper. So we just rewrap the file so that other players understand how to play it. So it's not being altered. It's just the instructions are being updated for other players who don't have the analytic ability that some of our tools do. So that's an important factor of getting these files. And think about down the road, maybe an appeals 7 years later, we still need to play that file. And if it's a special player that I needed and I don't have that, I can't find it, it's going to be very complicated to get that. So having it put into a standard format that any kind of standard playback system can use is going to be hugely beneficial, especially as you're sharing the file downstream to other users of that content.
Yeah, that's great. Great stuff. Thanks, Terry. Let me shift gears a little bit and talk, because I know there's some of the questions we typically get from prospective customers. So I just want to kind of head off some of those questions. The timing, the costs, some of your standard that are very important, obviously, to a customer to know if this is affordable, to know how long it's going to take, what the impact on my organization is going to be. Can you talk a little bit about the timing and time frame? I know it's kind of difficult because there's different size customers. There's New York City and then there's small cities. So can you maybe talk in general about the time frame and the implementation side of implementing a technology like Vault?
Sure. So it could vary a little bit because, again, like you said, size of organizations and the amount of data they have or the case volume that they might have could impact things. But being as Vault as a cloud solution, there isn't servers or infrastructure, anything that the organization has to really worry about. So they could get started very easily if there was not any integration or any special workflow customization they needed. They can get started, in a few weeks with the solution if they needed to. And then other ones, maybe more typical larger court might be a few months because they might want to have some workflow processes in place and things like that, and maybe some integration even with a case management system or something like that, which can add a little bit of time to the solution, but it can be rolled out rather quickly.
That's good to hear. I think that's really a benefit of the cloud, as you said. What could, let's say, if I worked in a court or a prosecutor's office, what can I do maybe upfront to get ready for this sort of technology?
Yeah, so since it is cloud-based, really, internet access is really your main driving factor from a technology side and preparation. So working definitely with the IT department to make sure you have network and bandwidth availability. A lot of people have a pretty good bandwidth today that are more than ample to work a solution like this, but it's always an opportunity to look at that and maybe beef up the pipe there a little bit to make it a little bit easier on the users, especially if you're getting into large video streaming functionality with this type of a solution. And then the other side is to really think about your process flow. Is there some intake? Is there review? Is there a little bit of workflow? Is there it's a prosecutor, is there an e-discovery kind of process where we just share this with a defense attorney? So some of that process control has to be thought about too. And if a digital evidence solution is part of that, where does it fit in that equation?
Yeah, thanks. And I know we've been talking a lot about prosecutors and courts and the other kind of the maybe larger use of this technology is law enforcement. And I know ImageSoft doesn't in particular focus on law enforcement, although we have law enforcement customers. Our target for DEM for the Vault solution is primarily the prosecutor and the courts, so kind of upstream from law enforcement. Can you talk a little bit, kind of why that focus and what's driving that?
Yeah, a lot of our client base is, after the police are involved and they submit things to the prosecutor or the district attorney. So that's really where we started thinking about where digital evidence was needed. And a lot of times the police agencies have body cams and dash cams and other hardware that comes with video recording and has a cloud-based storage for those already. So the police aren't going to want to really deploy something else to store digital evidence because they kind of have something that's bundled in with some of their equipment. So, but when they get to the point, maybe I have a 5-hour body cam footage, but I need 30 minutes that's relevant to a case, that 30 minutes now I need to submit to the prosecutor's office. And that's where we really find the need, because the prosecutors and the courts really aren't served well by the body cam kind of manufacturers that the police are using. So they needed something different that can handle a subset of the content coming in that's specific to a case, or be an exhibit that will be, displayed in the courtroom and so forth. So kind of that's where we see the fit coming in for a product like Vault, where we can kind of grab the pieces that are part of a case, bring them into the prosecutors and let them flow right into the courtroom and allow them to be played by all of the relevant parties that need to.
Yeah, that's a great point. So another question we get all the time, and I know this would be a tough one to just kind of answer with a single answer, but what does technology like this cost?
So the cost does vary a bit, again, based on size of the organization. So really we want to look at how much content, and most people don't really know how much content they're going to need in cloud storage, for example. So we can look at case volumes and other things like that to kind of help us determine what type of cost would be appropriate. But it's subscription based. So really there's, essentially a yearly fee that's paid. And if your volume goes up or down, the subscription adjusts accordingly. So it is very easy to get started and going, and you can just raise as you start to add more to the solution. That cloud storage would go up and allow the solution to grow with you without having to change or do anything. It just can automatically add the size that you need. So this is a competitive market now, and we are able to get prices down very low. So with cloud storage and all of the things that we do. So if you are interested in pricing, there's probably a handful of questions we would just want to ask to understand your user base and some of your case volume, and then we'd be able to provide a price that you could estimate for the next, X amount of years. So maybe for a 5-year kind of plan.
We touched on it a little bit, but maybe you could elaborate. I know within the criminal justice space, so when we're talking about criminal cases, which really most evidence is driven towards, at least the higher volume of evidence is driven towards criminal cases. Can you talk about kind of the security and some of the maybe federal and FBI requirements for managing that, and what make these solutions particularly maybe sophisticated and complex, and how the Vault system maybe addresses those things?
Yeah, so there's a lot of aspects that have to be in play to kind of meet all of the compliance standards that organizations are going to need. So CJIS is one. It's an FBI kind of guidelines for handling criminal data and exchanging that data with various systems. So we make sure we follow all of the different standards and practices for those types of guidelines. And that has to do with, the way things are stored, the audit trail that's put on, and the encryption that's used for transit, as well as files at rest and stored there up in the cloud. So there's a lot of those things that are already in place. And so the customers don't have to, worry about additional mechanisms. They're already enabled for them by default. And that audit trail is going to be very important. We also generate, a hash algorithm for every file that's put into the system, so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you can generate the hash again and prove that it's the exact same and the file was never altered. So some of those things are going to be very important just for maintaining the integrity of the files in the system. And then also, maybe a revision control concept. So if I wanted to redact maybe some faces out of a video, I could do that and bring it back into the system, and it would be a revision or a separate file. We never alter the original. So all of those things are going to be part of that, as well as just a security model. You have to be an authenticated user. It has to be shared with you and things like that. You can't just access and view things unless you're explicitly granted rights to.
Thank you. Last question, and maybe a little commercial for ImageSoft. So why ImageSoft? If someone were asked you that question and said, hey, give me a couple reasons why I should work with a company like ImageSoft, what would you say?
Well, maybe two main points. We as ImageSoft have been managing large-scale content for over 25 years. We've been working with courts and prosecutors, district attorneys for most of that time period, handling all the different case content that might be needed for this. So we've been doing this a long time. Digital evidence here is just a natural addition to documents that you would have been storing already. So that's one of the main things. We have the experience. We've been doing this a long time. And the second point, last point, I think is the support. ImageSoft has one of the best support teams I've ever seen. They handle all the calls direct. Even think about people uploading. It could be a civilian uploading and having some type of issue. They would call our support and we would help them through there. So having a top-rated support team behind you through an implementation like this is going to be a crucial step and well into the future when you expand and grow, or maybe take advantage of new features and things that are coming out.
Thank you for that. Nice commercial, Terry, and thanks for your help on this. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to talking to you about digital evidence in the future. We do plan to do a couple of more in-depth briefings and webinars, podcasts related to our Vault products, so stay tuned for those. And thank you very much.
Thanks again for joining us on this podcast. To learn more about ImageSoft, please visit ImageSoftInc.com. That's ImageSoftInc.com. If you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to Paperless Productivity, where we tackle some of the biggest paper-based pain points facing organizations today. We'll see you next time.